Joel Embiid, my word, how good is this guy? First of all, he's playing great overall. The defense, I think, is still there. We've talked about how good Philadelphia is with him in the game versus without. The man's scoring is Cody. What are his scoring numbers right now? He is incredible putting the ball in the basket.
Yeah, last I checked this, maybe a day ago, maybe a couple days ago, but he's scoring like 32 and a half points per 75 on +5 efficiency, which for a big man in 2021, oh my goodness.
So I think that Joel Embiid right now, there are maybe a couple other players in history that meet this kind of functional archetype, if you will. Stylistically, they're different, but functionally, this to me is young Wilt Chamberlain. That's what we're seeing. And if you look at Wilt's peak in 1962 and 1963, just from a scoring perspective, the famous 1962 season where he averaged 50 points a game. Now, of course, he's playing 48 minutes a night back then and just stayed in the game the whole time. But estimates of his per possession scoring and his efficiency relative to the league are almost identical to what we're seeing with Embiid right now. He was about 33, 34 points per 75, adjusted for inflation. And again, like +5, +6% true shooting. That's exactly where Embiid has been in the last two seasons. And one thing that I really wanted to appreciate, we were bouncing around some footage on him. His arsenal of his moves, it just continues to develop every year. He always had skill and he was a battering ram, but he just keeps putting polish on the same thing. He puts polish on the three-pointer. He puts polish on the mid-range. He puts polish on his handle. He puts polish on his fadeaway. I mean, Cody, stop me before I go full-blown scouting report here. I mean, how good is his scoring?
No, I'm going to stop you so I can start talking about him a little bit. I don't know if we've functionally ever seen a big man with this sort of skill set. I mean, we've seen big men that can shoot all of the court. You can point to like Dirk and whoever else. You can talk to like back-to-basket game with Akeem Olajuwon or even McHale. But the way that Embiid can do all this with like his face-up and isolation game, even bringing the ball up in like semi-transition and just being like, all right, I'm going to take this guy off the dribble. His like 15, 14-foot pull-up off of like this little hesitation dribble. I've never seen anybody with this size being able to do something like this. And I know we've always talked about Embiid's shooting. I mean, it was always like the joke with like the TNT crew. It's like, oh, they're always talking about Embiid not taking a bunch of threes because it's not what big men are supposed to do. Well, Embiid like progressed to another level here. And he's like, you know what? Actually, maybe people like Chris Paul have the right idea here. Maybe if I'm able to like pull up and just not be bothered by any sort of contest, that's going to make my drives even more dangerous. And I think that's the main thing that he's added to his game that I've never seen him be as smooth with before, is that like 10 to 16, maybe even out to like 18-foot pull-up mid-range jumper.
Yeah, and his shooting numbers right now are just fantastic. 38% from three over the last two seasons, 84% from the free throw line. And to your point, that outside 10 feet, that's 47%. Jokic in the last couple seasons since the bubble shut down, I know off the top of my head, between 10 and 20 feet, he's around 48%. Your all-time greats, your Durant, your Dirks, they can hit 50%. So you're humming if you're shooting 47% in the heart of that mid-range area, and you combine that with his three-point shooting. And to your point, Cody, I love the way he's getting into it. This sort of quote-unquote hang dribble move where you just pause a little bit, you hesitate like you're going to drive, and instead of putting it back on the floor, you flow right into the pull-up jumper. He loves that around the foul line area. You know, little hezzy, pick it up, kick the leg out, that little move where he floats his right leg out underneath him. It's smooth. It's really smooth. It's soft. The touch is fantastic. It's going in softly. He can make those over the best shot blockers in the league. And then you add the other stuff. I mean, you mentioned the Hakeem reference, that little fadeaway. He goes over either shoulder, but he likes to go over that right shoulder. That kind of reminds me of Hakeem. And I want to credit him for the way his body's working. This is someone who we're always concerned about longevity with injuries. We're always concerned about in-season durability or whether he's going to break down. But the way he looks right now, his burst and his agility and his footwork, it's it's incredibly impressive from an athletic standpoint, and then you marry that with the ball skills and the shooting. Think about him coming down the court in transition and kind of like Euro striding around and scooping in a bucket. It's just been great.
So the thing about that play, that I think you're specifically referencing a play against the Magic. There's this play, he gets the rebound, he brings it down in kind of transition, and he right when he gets to the three-point line, he just puts the bursts on and takes off, and when he lets go of his layup, his body's almost at he's sideways in the air. If any of you remember, this reminds me of this layup that Tony Parker took in the 2007 finals against the Cavs. And it's obviously much more twisty than this, and he was kind of under the basket, but the way that he was able to let go and be completely contorted. Embiid's 100 pounds more than Tony Parker, if not more. I've never seen someone move like that. And you referenced Jokic. Jokic doesn't even flow into jumpers this smoothly. Jokic kind of has this set shot catapulting type of jumper. Embiid's jumper looks like the fluidity of somebody that's a foot shorter than him. And when we're talking about defending him in isolation, I don't know what you're supposed to do. Because if you are one of a few people that can contest his shot or quick enough to stay in front of him, he turns around and backs you down, and nobody is stronger than him in the post. If you do get your hand in there for a contest, he's really good at I don't know what you would call it, but when you have get your hand caught in the cookie jar, and he jumps up and draws that contact, kind of like a Kevin Durant or Chris Paul would do. I don't know. He's been a marvel to watch, especially scoring-wise this season.
Yeah, and you have the rip through on free throws that you mentioned. You also just have his power, and the man is like a battering ram. I believe free throw attempts per 100 right now, the last 2 seasons, are around 16 free throw attempts every 100 possessions. Just to bring it back to Wilt, we mentioned Wilt a second ago. He was at 11 or 12 back in the 62 season. No comparisons. That's not apples to apples. The officiating and all that is different. But just in terms of the function, Cody, of how difficult it is to contain that, the fact that JoJo's also an 84% free throw shooter, where a lot of guys who draw fouls like this, whether it's Wilt or Shaq, a lot of the historical kind of battering rams don't shoot 85% from the line. So you add in the power. There was one play I loved reviewing this where they're playing the Rockets and Embiid's the roll man, because all this stuff we're talking about, skill from the top, pull up jumpers, stuff in transition, his post game, but then you put a guy like this off the ball. He's not the best roll man in the league, but he's still so difficult in those actions because of his skill and his size. And the Rockets wanted to switch, but the second a guard gets on him, he immediately starts yelling, help, 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 help. And it's just way too late and it's over. And, just like Jokic takes advantage of mismatches, Embiid, I feel like, bullies about 99% of the league, regardless of what position they play. And that's how you end up with this elite, I don't know where I'd put this as a scoring peak all time, but it's really, really good.
It is really good, and I think that Rockets player you're talking about might be Jalen Green that he gets on, and there's nothing he can do. He just kind of turns the shoulder in a drop step and just dunks, and it's just it looks like he's playing against an 8th grader.
Exactly. Yeah.
And when we're talking about Wilt too, something I want to bring up with that is I think this was from one of your Backpicks profiles for Wilt. Wilt wasn't as physical as Embiid was establishing deep post position. Embiid looks more like Shaq in that respect, where in the early offense, he just runs down there and he's like, I'm going to establish myself 3 feet in front of the basket, and there is nothing you can do to stop me from doing this. And that's how we can get a lot of those really close-up opportunities like that, is when he seals his man, there's no one in the league that can really do anything.
Thanks for listening. You can find the full episode of this Thinking Basketball podcast on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you enjoy podcasts.